Hey everyone, welcome to this brand new episode of Freedoms. You absolutely should stay until the end because this one's going to be amazing. We got Dan Beck, and he's the founder of 401 Go. They recently raised $12 million as a Series A round, which is amazing. So stay until the end. You should really do that because we're going to hit a lot of golden knowledge in this one. Dan, how do you feel about the recent round?
Thank you, Mark. I feel great. It's a lot of fun. I think more than anything, especially when we did our seed round. So this is our second round of fundraising, the Series A at 12 million. I think more than anything, obviously as a founder or an entrepreneur, you have a lot of conviction for the idea or the product or whatever it is you're working on. But it's, there's kind of a boost when you find somebody outside who says, no, I support that idea. I see the vision the way that you see it, enough that I'm willing to put some money behind it. So in a way, it's incredible to have kind of the market validate something that you're working on. And I think that's the most exciting thing about it. Yeah, of course you need the money to grow, and, kind of accomplish that vision. But I think as an entrepreneur, that validation is so important.
1000%. And for those who don't know, what does 401 Go do?
I'm so glad you asked. Our focus really is on how do we provide 401ks and make them easy and accessible for small businesses. We can certainly work with firms of any size, but we focused on kind of that SMB sector. And the reason why is because it's the one that's largely been overlooked by the
Mm.
industry for decades. And the reason why is because a 401k is an extremely complex benefit to
Oh, yeah.
offer. And so that's where usually a business would have to have an HR function or somebody that's an HR professional to manage that benefit for them. And so we felt that we could, overcome some of those hurdles from an administration standpoint by building a better, technology ecosystem where you could literally set up a 401k on our platform in as quick as 10 minutes, connect it to your payroll
Whoa,
system. So the ongoing administration is also fully
that's
automated.
fast.
And then at the end of the day, yeah, it's incredible. And we've really alleviated that burden to now a firm of any size. You could be a solopreneur, up to, some of our larger firms have hundreds of thousands of employees. And really we can accommodate anything through that tech platform that we've built.
And what's the largest pain that you spotted on the market that made you go, okay, this is something that's worth sacrificing my next 10 years for? How
Yeah.
did that go?
There were a number of problems that are all very interrelated. So a lot of it comes down to just the way this benefit is administered. Probably the biggest complexity is the way it's been approached in the past is you have these service providers that focus on a very thin portion of of everything that's involved in a 401k. So you have firms that do just administration, firms that do record keeping, custodial services, fiduciary services. And so in order to offer a 401k benefit, it's not like you just go to one company and say, I want my 401k. You're oftentimes working with 4 or 5 different vendors. And so that's what makes it so cumbersome for a small business. And so we created a bundled solution. And there's other firms that have done the same thing, but behind that bundled solution, there's all these, very fractured parts of like a tech stack in order to provide that. And so there were distribution issues that we solved for, as well as, major technology hurdles. And then a big part of it too is how do you realign incentives? Because financial advisors who are oftentimes the ones selling 401ks, they're compensated based off of assets. That's the reason why they've had no interest in going down market and serving smaller firms because it's going to take them years before it reaches a size that the advisor is really interested in. And so they need a quick, easy, low friction environment. And if you can provide that for them and help to realign some of those incentives, suddenly they have interest to go down market. And that's what we've enabled them to do.
Yeah, speaking of low friction, I'm guessing that there's zero friction at this point because you're just raising nonstop and you're going, for the next round. Literally, we're going to discuss this also. You're going soon for a Series B. So you've
Yes.
eliminated so many barriers and you've caused a frictionless process that this is actually
Mhm.
working.
It is. And the exciting thing is we were focused on really the problem and how do we, provide a solution for that problem. And in so doing, we built incredible value for our company going forward that is not just the product itself or the solution, but actually the full tech stack that we've built. The one thing we knew that the industry had a lot of issues when it came to technology. Very few transactions are fully automated from start to finish in financial services. So we knew there was opportunity there from a technology standpoint to create some, better efficiency. But we had no idea that that would be one of the primary reasons why we're seeing a lot of the growth that we are. we're finding that incumbents in this space that have never really had the ability to go down market are coming to us, and they're interested in not just the service that we have to offer, but our technology and some of the other elements that we've built. And so that's really the reason why we're raising a Series B, is it allows us to kind of build out more of those capabilities and create better products for the industry and some of our incumbents to consume and utilize.
For sure. And I'm also just curious, like, have you had some white labeling requests from all of the inbound that you had, or is this mostly like consumer facing?
We distribute almost exclusively through partner channels,
Hmm.
and so those partners are either financial service providers, whether it's a private wealth advisor, a 401(k) specialist, or a bigger firm. That's kind of the more established distribution channel. But then we also distribute through payroll providers, and so we do have, and the way that some of those relationships have progressed, oftentimes it starts out as kind of a referral relationship where we work with a provider maybe because we already have some mutual clients and they refer business to us. But oftentimes we'll see that turn into something deeper where they want more of an embedded relationship. Either they want to fully white label the product or they want to do some co-branded relationship. And the exciting thing is we had two of those pretty big opportunities happen this year. And initially it was a discussion around white label. But then
Hmm.
as that, firm started to dig deeper into 401 Go and who we are and our service and everything else, they found out that we have incredible brand value.
Right.
If you go look at some of the major review sites and compare us to our competitors, we win on every metric when it comes to service, quality of product, everything. And so for that reason, they initially thought of using us purely as a white label, but they're like, no, there's actually a lot of value in that brand. And so they both pivoted to a co-branded relationship.
Yeah. And Dan, I just want to point out something that really needs to stay clear with the founders that are watching this. So a Series A happens, in 1/10 of all startups that actually get to survive to a seed round,
Mhm.
even maybe less, right? So um, your environment, the way that you've built it, you're literally within layers of partnerships, right? Like you're not going
Mhm.
and like trying to acquire directly endpoint customers. You're literally going for partners that would help you acquire more sub partners, etc. So, do you feel like this unlocked an extra phase of growth for you? This type of model?
It does. And really, I believe that's part of the founder journey is you often come in with a very strong idea of here's the problem we're going to solve and here's how we're going to solve it. And oftentimes one or both of those elements change. Some of the time you pivot and you go like, oh, actually there's another problem that we can solve with this method that we built out. Or some of the time you go, okay, maybe the method as we imagined it wasn't quite right, but we can
Mm,
still solve this problem using some other method or some other way of getting there. And I think that's definitely that evolution has been present in what we've been doing at 401 Go, where initially the focus was on how do we just kind of close this access gap. But in so doing, we unlocked a lot more opportunity that's related to the technology we're building, the services that we have to offer, to where we were focused on, really kind of new startup business, which is in many ways it's a greenfield opportunity. But
yeah.
then realize there's also, the total addressable market got much bigger once we had incumbents coming to us interested in the technology layer. And so a lot of that, again, at the end of the day is, it's about how do we deliver value? We delivered it through, a more comprehensive product offering, but in so doing, others want to tap into that value as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, this is getting super interesting. Although I just want you to please take us back to the past and tell us who was that 10-year-old Dan back in the days.
um, it's a good question, and I think that's really the reason that I do what I do now and absolutely love it is that 10-year-old version of me was just endlessly curious. I
Mm.
wanted to know how the world worked. I was always asking a million questions. I recall times where my dad would be working on a car or something like that, and I'd be under there asking, "What's this? What's this?" And he'd sometimes get tired and be like, "Son, I need to finish this. Can we like pause? We pause the questions for a moment?" And then, so I just fell in love with learning how things work, and I think because of that curiosity, entrepreneurship was a natural path. And the reason why is every day is so different. The learning is
Yeah.
nonstop. Prior companies were all bootstrapped, but we did everything from, direct to consumer style brands that were distributed, almost exclusively through wholesale. global manufacturing and arbitrage, e-commerce, you name it. And every time the reason the businesses were so different is because I wanted to learn something new. And it's the same thing. I'm having so much fun right now in 401 Go. This is the first time that we've been, a Delaware C corp, and we've gone through this VC fundraising process, and so it's incredibly rewarding to have a board that can help me grow and learn and just really satisfy that curiosity within. And I feel like too, if you have curiosity and you've got the chops for being an entrepreneur, that really is in many ways a recipe for success, because so much of being an entrepreneur is solving for problems. And you're not going to solve problems or even identify problems unless you're willing to ask why something does or doesn't work the way that it does. And in so doing, you find opportunities to create scale, efficiency, gaps in the market, whatever it may be. And I've been able to accomplish that through just asking a lot of questions.
Oh yeah. And when you were young, do you remember like the first business that you tried out? Was it like a lemonade stand or something like that?
It's kind of funny. So I was born in the '80s, early '80s, and I remember, we had a computer in our home. It was a Commodore 64,
Hmm.
was our first one,
Oof.
and we had a modem, and I connected to bulletin board services, which in many ways kind of predate the internet. And I remember learning about some of the internet in the very, would have been '90s. And I remember going to my dad and saying, "Hey, I earn $20 a month so I can have a phone line come into the house and set up my own bulletin board service." He's like, "Why would you do that?" I'm like, "Well, there's this thing called the internet." And so
Yeah.
and he kind of told me, "Oh, it's a fad. That's, not going anywhere." And
Like
and
crypto,
so
yeah.
that was kind of the first idea was, just and that's one thing I love about technology, as I like to engage with it. And if it's something that just kind of um, expands my curiosity, then to me that is something that has promise. And that's what I experienced. The BBS, bulletin board services, they were cool, but having them connected to the internet suddenly really shifted the way that I saw, this kind of novelty of bulletin board services. And I thought, there's something cool here. I don't know exactly what it is, but there's something cool here, and I want to be part of it. And that's one of the ways I learn best, is by getting involved and building an idea or a product around something that I'm very curious in. At the time, it was the internet. Now it's financial services and how we can improve those processes. So that was an early idea. It didn't really go anywhere, but that's okay. It was something that I think was kind of my first spark of how can you turn this curiosity into something that could be a career in many ways.
And did you, for example, like you started, going to the university at some point, and did you have like more advanced ideas at that point that you tried out and that like miserably failed, or did you even sell previous businesses? Did that happen?
Even my university experience, I think, is kind of an indicator of how I've moved through life and a career.
Hmm.
I went to like 5 different universities, switched
Wow.
majors a dozen times, and ultimately it took me 10 years. And the reason why is because I'd go to university, and then some big project or opportunity would come along that prevented me from being able to do both university and pursue the idea.
Ah,
And so I drop out and do that. My first career was really in video and film production.
okay.
And my dream, in high school was to be a TV producer. And I think the reason why is because, again, in like productions, you have access to, part of my job, I was interviewing, major CEOs from around the world, really. And it just gives
Wow.
you a lot of exposure to many different ideas. And so it was something that, again, it just satisfied my curiosity. And so it was hard because oftentimes I'd be working on like a national TV show where I was traveling, half the year. And so I couldn't even do night school. And so, I'd go to school, drop out, go back to school, drop out. And then at some point I kind of got burned out on, essentially trading time for money. And some of the creative aspects of, I love being creative, but it's sometimes hard when you have someone else that in many ways owns the creative process or decision by committee. So some of those things just started to wear on me, and I wanted to find a way to do something different. And that's where, I kind of ventured into doing e-commerce products, overseas manufacturing, and then slowly just kind of walked away from the video productions. And at that point, because I was no longer traveling all the time, I was finally able to go back to school and get a degree. And basically, I just went into, a counselor with transcripts from all these different universities and said, "What's the quickest path to finishing?" Because I wanted to finish more
Ugh.
than anything. I was already very successful in career and had multiple businesses at that point,
Oh,
and
wow.
I just wanted to finish. And so, they told me something in business. I did business information systems, and it's been helpful in what I'm doing now. But yeah, that's kind of for me. School was it wasn't necessarily means to an end. It was just part of the process. I'm glad I got it done, but no way would it was was it really necessary to me doing what I'm doing today.
Interesting, interesting. But you said that you had multiple businesses. Could you tell us like what type of businesses did you have back in the days?
So the first was kind of the video
Yeah.
productions, and then from there, I realized I was pretty good at doing web development,
Oh,
because
nice.
that's again like creative marketing and process, and so I started doing that, and then realized I don't like the code aspects of it. I do like the design parts,
Mm,
and so it kind of evolved with a lot of these things, and then I found out that I was really good at SEO before SEO was really even a thing,
okay.
where I had
Nice.
clients and I was like, "Yeah, I don't really wanna make your websites anymore, but I would like to help you sell things and kinda tell a story and do the marketing and branding side of things." And I got really good at it where they would be ranked number 1 in, like, their area or their product, and so, they had tremendous success. And then, so I had kind of a little marketing agency, a boutique agency for a little while. Um, and then at that point, I decided, let's see if I can do this for myself, and I
Ah,
kind of came up with some product ideas that I could manufacture overseas. And then I got into selling on eBay, Amazon in the very early days, building some of my own brands. And
wow.
then, just one thing leads to another. I got really good at that, learned about overseas manufacturing, and then companies would hire, my brother and I to help with overseas manufacturing, to help with distribution. We own a warehouse. So we
Okay.
got into, warehouse, global logistics, and, just kind of one thing leads to another. And like I said, if you're curious, you start pulling on threads and it never stops.
That's incredible. Yeah, absolutely. So you had so many different point of views throughout the career, even
Hmm.
before you started out for One Go, which is an extremely
Yes.
diverse ecosystem for understanding like what do you want to invest the next 10 years in, right? So what was like the
Hmm.
breaking point where at some point you were like sitting there and you're saying to yourself, okay, I absolutely need to go ahead and just jump off the cliff and fully invest all of my time into this project right here, which is an amazing
Hmm.
service, an amazing growing company.
Yeah. For us, it was really there were two different instances where my brother and I had tried to set up 401k or something similar in prior companies,
Hmm.
and both times it was a miserable experience where either
Okay.
we had a hard time finding service providers that were willing to talk to us, or two, just simply because I've always had kind of my own businesses and I've worked for myself. I
Hmm.
didn't know what it was like to have HR functions and what they would do, and so just some of my ignorance, is part of it, but essentially we couldn't find a way to offer this benefit to our employees. And
Hmm.
that's where the more we kind of dug in, again, that curiosity, the more we tried to learn about it, the more we realized there was an opportunity. So I had a friend of mine who's a financial advisor, and he had just taken a new role to run the 401k division for a local benefit shop. And we were kind of catching up over lunch, and I brought this up and just said, "Why is this such a pain?" And we got talking about it, and he made a comment something along the lines of, "Yeah, if there was a solution out there for small businesses, I have like hundreds of clients that would be looking for that."
Huh.
So as an entrepreneur, your ears perk up, and you go, "Hey, maybe I should look into this and see if it really is as painful as what is as the way I experienced it."
Do you feel like
And
this
so
was
that
the
was the
spark?
point.
Yeah.
It certainly was. Yeah, it certainly was. Where there was some personal pain associated with it, but then you also hear, or that was a market signal that there's an opportunity. And then we spent about a year evaluating it, really looking at, taking demos from some of the big technology
Oh,
providers,
wow.
talking to experts in the industry, because neither my brother or myself came from, financial services. And
Hmm.
in many ways, I actually think that was a benefit because it allowed us to have a fresh perspective. We didn't have these predefined notions of how this product needed to be delivered or how the technology needed to be built. We were able to kind of have a very fresh approach, with the help of one of our other co-founders. He has a lot of industry experience, and so with his
Ah.
guidance and then mine and my brother's kind of nuanced approach to scale and automation and business services and that sort of thing, we were able to build something that's truly innovative.
Wow, Dan, a lot of founders, they don't even talk with the market before building. They don't even know if the market actually wants what they're building. So I understand that
Mhm.
you guys kind of scoped, the demand out there for a year, not like 10 meetings. We're talking about a huge commitment to understand if there's really a need for what you're going to build.
Yeah. Yeah, and part of that again is we knew that, we were looking for something big. We've had some sizable exits,
Mm.
multi-million-dollar exits
Wow,
before with other
congrats.
businesses, and yeah, so I mean, we weren't necessarily chasing dollars or success or anything of that nature. We wanted to
Mm.
solve something big and messy that could really have a lasting impact. And there was certainly the spark there, and we were like, "Oh, this might be it." And as we, dug deeper and deeper and deeper, we saw that it is indeed a problem worth solving. The other thing too that's really interesting is even in firms where they have a 401(k), you look at the utilization, and those employees that are younger, lower wage, where they have access to a 401(k), participation rates are still historically below 20%. And so we saw this isn't just an access gap issue because those individuals have access to their 401(k), but why aren't they using it? And so we thought we could do better. We had some ideas of, like just nudge theory and, how do we get them to do something that they should be doing, and thought we could do better. And the thing that I love is when we look at that same cohort on our platform, participation rates are over 52%. So we're doing an incredible job at helping individuals that, frankly, the industry's never been able to serve. And I think, again, a lot of that is the result of a fresh perspective, the fact that we came into this thinking of it very differently than many of the incumbents in the space. And I kind of joke that, he and I, my brother and I, have over a decade of experience getting people to buy stuff they probably, frankly, didn't really need. When you're selling consumer products, kind of creating that sense of need. And now we're kind of, paying our penance or making up for that in some way by getting people to do things they should be doing, like saving for retirement, saving the dollar instead of spending it. And so we were able to take a lot of what we learned in e-commerce and marketing and those types of things and apply it to a new industry. And we've had success because of that fresh perspective.
Absolutely, absolutely. And during that year of understanding, if you could have a potential product market fit, what type of signals were you looking for? And I'm asking this because, maybe founders that are listening in right now, they're currently also probing the market to see if their MVPs could be a fit. So did you have like some sort of structure or I don't know, like some framework to understand, okay, yeah, if we get to this type of KPI, then we should go ahead and move to production. Like, how did you guys figure that out?
There were a number of kind of market dynamics that we were looking at. Uh, and so there probably a big part of it is just taking demos from different technology providers, going through the buying process ourselves as a customer, kind of secret shopping to see what that experience was like.
I love that.
At the same time that we kind of had this idea, we weren't necessarily the first. I mean, there were a couple other firms out there that had just barely launched, came out of Y Combinator, and they were trying to focus on kind of the same market segment that we were trying to solve in many ways the same problems. And so it gave us a chance to kind of look at that experience and
Mhm.
how well they were, able to tackle that. The other thing too that I think is interesting, and this can go both ways. It's a two-edged sword. A lot of times when you talk to people in the industry, they'll say, "That's a fool's errand. Why would you do that?" We heard time and time again, "There's no money in record keeping. Why would you do that?" The reason that there's not a solution is because it's impossible. It's too hard to do. It's too complex. It's too messy. Basically, a lot of like, no, 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 it won't work. And so some of the time when you hear that a lot, you can go, man, there must be a lot of desperation. There must be a big opportunity here. If everyone's saying it's not possible and I can really make it work, then this is going to be really valuable. Some of the time you're looking for a lot of validation, but oftentimes if it's so easily validated, then other people are probably going after that problem. So the fact that there were a lot of no's to me meant that there was a pretty big hurdle. There was a big barrier that we had to get over in order for us to accomplish this. And in fact, that's really how we met our third co-founder, Jared. Is he was somebody we brought in as a consultant, and we outlined this idea and said, "This is what we're trying to accomplish. What do you think?" And he goes, "I don't think that's possible." At this point, we're kind of fresh up, like, well, what if it was? And then, and he's like, "I don't know. I really don't think it's possible." And at that point, we're like, "Well, can we pay you to tell us why? Because everyone says the same thing, but we really need to figure out why." So we brought him in as a consultant, and we said, "What's the biggest, most difficult challenge you think that we could solve? And let's start there." And that was really the plan design process because that's inherently complex and messy. And we were able to kind of accomplish that within 3 months and show him that it was possible. And at that point, that light bulb went off, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, I've been thinking about this all wrong." And he left a very cushy, high-paying job at a very big national recognized firm to come to a startup, which was terrifying for him. For my brother and I, it was just It was a Wednesday.
Oh my God.
For him, this was a whole new, a whole new thing. I remember how terrifying it was for him and his wife to make that switch. But since he's been doing it and he's been here, he's like, there's no way I could ever go back to that environment where you put on these blinders, you put on these restrictions on yourself. The industry does. It's so fun to come to an environment where it's like, but what if you could?
Oh God.
And so by just asking that question over and over again, that's where you find the opportunity.
This is crazy. What you're saying, it's absolutely true. When we're talking about the largest businesses out there, like Airbnb, people were saying, "What? Who would let strangers sleep at their places?" Or Uber, who would let
Mhm.
strangers get into your personal car, and all that
Yeah.
stuff. Like the wildest ideas are met with fire, literally. Like
Mhm.
people hate something that defies constant logic that is already like assumed as the standard. And
Mhm.
like what you've done is extremely counterintuitive. Like literally, you looked for signals that are telling you no, don't do it, and you kind of turn them around with like Shaolin power, and you're like, no, we're actually gonna use all that
Mhm.
energy towards growth, and we're gonna find out
Yes.
why it's not possible. And I think this is exactly what stands, the one percenters from the 0.001 percenters apart. Like literally, those little mind tactics that you apply to yourself, that's the mindset technique that allows you to grow. Like what do you think about that?
Yeah. No, you're spot on, and I think in many ways it's, um, some of the stuff we were doing before were like outdoor sporting goods and building brands and some really cool, sexy, fun things. And I joke like when I'm getting my hair cut, if I don't want to have a conversation around like career, they're like, what do you do? I'm like, oh, I work in 401k. They're like, boring. Move on to the next question. If I say I'm an entrepreneur, then obviously we dive a little bit deeper. But the reason I mention that is because there's opportunities everywhere. It could be in something as boring as 401k administration, and oftentimes it is in the boring areas where there's the greatest opportunity because no one's looking there. Where's everyone looking right now? AI. And there's incredible promise. I'm excited about it. There's a lot of amazing things and some, billion, trillion-dollar companies that are yet to be made, that are on the scene right now. So it is exciting, but it's also a very crowded field because everybody's looking there. And so again, like at the end of the day, some of the time, the less obvious, the more boring the business is, uh, that's where some of the bigger opportunities are. So to me,
1000%.
yeah, I mean, I've learned to fall in love more with, the process of taking an idea and making it real than just falling in love with an idea. And I think that's really part of the
Hmm.
process is about execution over ideas. Don't fall in love with the idea, fall in love with the process of making that idea real. And when you do that, you're okay to pivot. You're okay to pursue maybe a slightly different idea, slightly different outcome, slightly different way of getting there, but that's really, I think, the reason why, my brother and I have been able to do everything from a food truck to, overseas manufacturing, consultancies, import businesses, and now financial services is because we've really kind of built our skill set around making ideas become reality and just having good ideas. Like a 401k that's automated, I think the reason we had some really good early adoption is because it wasn't that unique of an idea. It's just nobody could accomplish it. Everyone's like, "Oh, it'd be so much better if this wasn't so difficult." No one just decided to actually, tackle that issue. And so some of the time, it's the not so sexy ideas that actually have the most opportunity.
Yeah, that's the pattern I spotted also. Literally, like, it can be some weird idea that you wouldn't even think of. Like, for example, tending to like CRM for garages, in some
Mhm.
specific niche like trucking,
Mhm.
whatever, and no one does that. So that's like a niche that you can fully dominate. If it's boring, like what you said is gold. Like literally, you're there just on a regular haircut, and the person's asking, yeah, so what do you do? I'm in 401k. Just slides as stealth, right? Like they have no clue
Yeah.
that you're, on a business. Basically, that's like probably worth more than 100 million at this point, and even more.
Mm.
So, it's like a good position to be in, like in a stealth mode kind of position where no one
Yeah.
even understands because it sounds boring, but oh my god, it's everything.
Mhm.
But
Yeah. Yeah. And you fall in like, again, the process is fun. Like the
Yeah,
people that we work with are the best in the industry. Our company is a talent magnet in so many ways because we have a solid reputation, and that's where it gets really exciting. Is I have an incredible executive team that's very supportive, that makes just like I every day I'm so excited to get up, come to work, and solve a new problem. It never gets old. There's always something to solve. There's always and it's just fun. Like that's the thing that I love about it is the culture we have, the environment, the people, the problem that we're working on. There's also the simple fact that we're helping a lot of people achieve in many ways their dreams, like building the financial independence. So there's just something incredibly rewarding about what we're doing, and ultimately the people that we're doing that with.
absolutely. And when you were building, I know you mentioned Y Combinator. Like, did you think about also maybe going for YC or Techstars or any other accelerators, or you were kind of in bootstrap mode back in the days?
We did early on, and for whatever reason, there was an interest. It wasn't sexy enough. We
Huh.
we didn't make the grade. There was one accelerator that we did. It was called Generator,
Okay.
and going through that was really helpful, especially because that one had corporate sponsors, and the corporate
Mm.
sponsors were firms that we work with, like Allianz Life and
Oh, that's huge. Yeah.
Securian Financial. And so it was beneficial to have kind of access to those executives through that program.
Wow.
So that made a lot of sense for us. I think accelerators can be very helpful, depending on the stage of the business. I think the difference is for us, we already had a lot of business experience. We've, over a dozen times taken something from zero to, a million, whatever it may be. And so we had a lot of success in kind of like early traction. How do you get an idea, go to market strategy, all of that developed. And and I think in so many ways that's usually what kind of most accelerators do is they help you take an idea and teach you that process of executing on that idea. We sort of already had that. And so for us, like an accelerator program was more about access than it was necessarily like the education component that we'd get out of it.
But that's like very humble of you. You already had the millions made, yet you're like still, okay, I'm a student of life, I'm a student of business. I'm still going to go in and see the opportunity that presents itself. And you actually hit gold, like literally speaking with executives from, one of the biggest
Mm.
insurance companies out there, probably helped out. Like, do you feel that it was a huge move forward for you, or it was kind of a minimal push? Like, how did you feel about that?
No, I mean, it was there was certainly a lot that was learned along the way. There's not necessarily a distribution partnership that opened
Mhm.
up because of it. In many ways, we would have hoped for that. But there's also kind of a gap or a disconnect between what we're delivering and some of the time, like these insurance conglomerates, they have good products. It's just that that distribution process is very messy, and that's why oftentimes you've got insurance agents or financial advisors that are involved in selling those. Is there's a lot of paperwork and manual process, and so for us, it's more about scale. So it certainly did open my understanding about these other options or products that we could incorporate into what we're doing. But there's still some technical hurdles that we need to overcome. And so, those at least those doors were opened, and we have those conversations on a regular basis. I have, a pathway into the C-suite at, some of these big firms. And so that is certainly helpful. It may not necessarily, I couldn't say, oh, it added a bunch of immediate traction for us or resulted in X amount of return on investment. But it did, add to, I'd say, the long-term robustness of 401 Go and what we're working on.
And did you wanna, like, stay bootstrapped for a while and something, like, broke? Maybe something in your mind went like, "Ah, let's just raise." Like, did something happen like that or
No, it was we had bootstrapped for a couple years,
Uh-huh.
and we knew that we were going after some challenging market segments oftentimes require, some significant capital overhead. The
Mm.
fact that we wanted to build our own product rather than just kind of slap a Band-Aid on, existing industry solutions, we knew that there was going to be a significant amount of kind of overhead that we had to build in order to go after this market opportunity. And when you're serving an SMB customer, that's very different. You look at a lot of startups, and typically they're trying to go and land these big 50, $100,000 a year
Yeah.
contracts. When you're selling, 401k plans is as little as a few $100s to a small business, you've got to have volume. And so in order to kind of build a firm that could deliver volume, that could deliver efficiency, build out software, there's a pretty significant, hurdle to overcome We need additional capital to do that. The exciting thing is we didn't wait, we waited to fundraise until we already had about 100 clients on the platform.
Okay.
And so it wasn't just an idea at that point. There was real traction. And so it made it a lot easier for the investors to look and say, okay, this is a viable company. The other thing too, a lot of times people don't realize is those early seed stage investors, it's more about investing in the individual and the founders than it is necessarily the idea. And the
Yeah.
reason is some of the time, as I mentioned, the idea's got to evolve. And really for them, there's no traction. There's a lot of risk involved. They want to work with a team that knows how to execute ideas, not necessarily that has the best idea. So you may have an incredible idea, but the fact that we already had, established businesses, we knew how to build businesses, take ideas and execute on them, I think was the reason why for us it was relatively easy to do our seed funding. And then that kind of dovetails into the Series A. So, that's one other piece of advice for a founder is, one of the best ways you can attract investors is show your ability to execute on ideas, not necessarily, try to convince them you have the best idea.
That's gold right there. And I'm just curious, like, while you were building during the 2 year long bootstrap phase, you said like you had approximately 100 clients. Like, do you mind sharing like the revenues that you were getting before you started raising the actual seed round, or?
Yeah, I mean, they were very insignificant compared to cost. I don't think because I mean, when we're serving that customer at the time, our average contract value was probably $800, maybe
Ah,
1,000.
yeah. So that's
So
small,
you
but
can do
there's
the math
track.
and
Yeah.
see. Yeah, yeah, and so for us, it was more about validating because the challenge we're taking on is massive and complex. The government entities that we have to deal with that are, regulating what we're doing are
Yeah.
the Department of Labor, the IRS, the SEC, and there's very strict rules and it's extremely we're dealing like we just crossed we have over $1 billion dollars in assets that we're
Wow.
managing. These
Congrats.
are
That's
people's
huge.
futures and livelihoods. It is. And so obviously the stakes are high. And so for
Mm.
that reason, that those 100 clients, it was more about vetting out the product. And again, it was much more imperative for us because we actually built our own product rather than going out and buying other product and just putting a different, interface on it. So we wanted to make sure we had, enough plans that had gone through, a full year or two of kind of that business cycle of a 401k to really prove that it's working. This is possible. We can create scale. We can do something the industry's never done before. And so it had less to do with like the revenue associated with that, those first 100 clients, and more the fact that we didn't have any, major technical issues or regulatory issues that we had to overcome.
Yeah, and during that phase, maybe you can like share a few key mistakes that you've made, for the founders listening in that are still in that phase. Maybe if they can avoid those mistakes and hit a wall, anything to report there?
If you know that you're going to be fundraising, establishing yourself as a Delaware C corp is imperative. Do
Mm.
that sooner rather than later. There's a number of reasons. One of the biggest being what's called QSBS. It's kind of this tax strategy where investors are more inclined to invest in a business that's QSBS eligible because what that does is reduce the tax burden when they do get that payday. They don't have to pay taxes on a certain amount. So it's complex. It's messy. The founder should look that up. But one of the things that kicks off that timeline is you registering as a Delaware C corp. So one, do that. Number two is find attorneys that do venture capital. Our first attorneys that helped us kind of form, some of those organizing documents, they were good attorneys, but they weren't, startup attorneys. And there were things that kind of came back and we had to resolve at a pretty significant cost later on as we started to fundraise because the attorneys that we were working with weren't, they said we could do startup. Setting up an LLC or something of that nature is very different than building a company that's going to go through multiple rounds of fundraising, and is a Delaware C corporation and fits kind of what I call a national rigor when it comes to those formation documents. And so those were two mistakes that we made early on. Was just not really kind of setting ourselves up right and having the right legal team to work with.
Wow. No, that's huge. Thanks for sharing that, Golden. I'm also curious, like, how many rejections did you go through to finally, get to the first yeses during those initial funding stages?
There were hundreds, countless,
Oh, yeah.
and it's kind of and I think that's part of, again, just that process of going through, and in a way, especially that first fundraise cycle, it can be rather demoralizing when it's just
Mm,
no after no after no. And some of the time, like even getting somebody to talk to you or listen to you is a challenge. And that's why I think it's so important that, once they do say yes, like that is market validation in your idea. That is somebody saying this is a good enough idea, we'll put money behind it. That is huge. That to me is bigger than the money itself. And so that was the exciting thing, but yeah, we had hundreds of no's. I spent a lot of time in kind of like the local, startup ecosystem, getting to know who are the angel investors, what companies are getting funded, how are they getting funded. One of the best ways I feel you can learn how to sell a product is be a customer of that product. And so essentially I realized I'm selling an idea to an investor. How do I get a better idea of how to best do that? Well, I'll be an investor myself. And
mm.
so I took, a few $100,000 from some prior exits. And what did I do? I became an angel investor and I spent a
Wow,
year investing in a bunch of different companies
that's
so I could hear a
amazing.
lot of pitches, get an idea of how to approach these investors. And so by becoming a customer, I was better able to speak to those investors that were interested in investing in us. And so again, it's just part of that, very curious process of trying to understand because I think it's important to know, like when you're speaking to somebody at a firm, is it an analyst? Is it a general partner? Why does that matter? What are their motivations?
Hmm.
If it's an analyst, they're looking for a win. So how do you make their job easier? How are they being compensated? And when you can better understand the dynamics of who's involved in that yes or no decision, then you can better sell to that individual. You can better understand what is it that matters to them, because if you can speak to that, that gets you to a yes sooner rather than later, and oftentimes too, even a no. There's a number of firms that have said no, and I'm really glad we didn't take money from them.
Nice.
They make a reputation for either the way they work with certain founders, or maybe
Mm.
they're not a good fit for the industry, or they would have pushed us faster than we wanted to move. And so many times, like those no's are what teach you how to get to a yes and who you should be working with.
And during those no's, do you remember if you had like very low points, of maybe like founder self-esteem where you were like, am I doing the right thing? Maybe I should like quit and, go for the next shiny object. Like, did you have that?
There was an element of that, and I think more than anything, it was the fact that I knew there was an opportunity, but being in an industry that was new to me, financial services, being in 401ks that, may come across as kind of just boring and stale or whatever, it wasn't as sexy as like me figuring out how to sell fast cars or something like that. And so it was the process was exciting, but in some ways I was kind of getting too caught up in the product or the industry. And once we started seeing the kind of success that we were having and how we were really helping individuals, that kind of reinvigorated and lit a fire in me,
Hmm.
to where in the end, I'm like, it doesn't matter at this point. If like one, we're going to find fundraising. If not, we'll continue to bootstrap this and we'll be successful. We might just need to move a little bit, slower than we anticipated. Um, and so at that point, it was, once you've kind of come to that level of conviction, doesn't matter if they say no. You're like, okay, it's no for you, but it doesn't mean no to my idea. The idea has life. It is, and that's where it was a lot easier. The fact that we had traction, we were seeing that we were making an impact. Frankly, the first client that we signed up was one of my own businesses,
Ah.
and it was a good product. My employees were happy. It led to really incredible outcomes for a number of these employees, and so that's what mattered most to me. And so hearing a no didn't really matter at that point. It's more just like, well, it's unfortunate you don't see the value here. You're going to regret this at some point.
Oh yeah. They
So I
already
think
are.
that's really kind of exactly.
My God, I love that. I love that. So, you used one of your businesses as a initial kind of MVP stage,
Mhm.
beta test where you can see, okay, maybe there's like breaking points here and there that we can fix, things that you actually need from your own product. And then eventually,
Mhm.
as you started deploying this onto other businesses, probably it helped like crazy, just
Yeah.
in doing that validation to your own business.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, at the end of the day, this is the reason we wanted to offer this benefit. The reason we discovered this idea was I had employees that I view like family that needed help, and I thought, what better way to help them financially than to incentivize them to save for retirement?
Oh, yeah.
That's what a 401k is. You're basically saying, look, for every dollar you put in, I'll give you a dollar up to a certain amount. And it was exciting. I mean, we had our kind of summer all hands event, just a couple months ago, And it was exciting to bring everybody out. And I actually brought one of those employees from, kind of one of my businesses. His name is Cameron, to tell the story of Cameron. And we had T-shirts printed up that said, "We do this for Cameron," because I wanted people to remember this is the reason why we're here.
Mm.
It's so exciting to be in a startup environment that's very mission oriented. And in that situation, you want to make sure everybody's apparent of what the mission is and why it really matters. So I brought in Cameron. We had a conversation. He's in his early 20s, and he has more safe for retirement than 75% of Americans.
That's
And
crazy, man.
when I
Yeah.
talked to him about that experience, I mean, at some point he was saving like 50% of his paycheck, and the reason why is that experience with 401 Go really kind of created, part of our mission statement isn't like, hey, how do we create access? It's about how do we ignite the desire in somebody?
Mm.
Because once you do that, it doesn't matter if they have a 401 or not. They're going to save for the future and they're going to figure it out. So the 401 is just, we call it it's the gateway drug to saving for your future. And the
Love that.
reason why is because you got that incredible employer match. And so for Cameron, he experienced that, and it changed his entire way of seeing and viewing money. Suddenly he
Mm.
realized, you know what? I get more excited saving a dollar, investing it and seeing it grow than I do in going and buying something off of Amazon. And so that's really the power of what we're doing is we're igniting this desire through what the industry considers a boring, stale, overly regulated product. And that to me is exciting. And so that's why I wanted to bring Cameron in is to say, guys, this is why we're doing this. Like, let's not forget, especially as we're growing in size and, we have nearly 100 employees now, and that's going to continue to accelerate. We can't forget this is why we're doing it.
Amazing. And for the first round, so I think it was 2.7, like we're talking about the seed round. How did that go down for when you guys closed the round with the investors?
It was, we found really good investors. Again, like at the time, there's always kind of these hot topics with investing. Like right now, it's AI. There's been a big surge around crypto.
Yeah.
You kind of name it. They should kind of chases whatever is sexy at the moment. And 401 has never been sexy.
Yeah.
So we're making it sexy, but prior to us, like it's just been kind of boring. And so it was hard to sometimes find interested investors. But when we found the right ones, they got just as excited as we did.
Hmm.
And that's very invigorating. And so we found an investor, Impression Ventures. They're out of Toronto, Canada.
Oh, nice.
And they knew exactly a lot of the pain problems that we were trying to solve for because they
Wow.
were in kind of that insurtech, fintech space. And they also knew that our unit economics are very different than somebody that's building enterprise software. And so they could appreciate some of those things that other firms would look at and be like, yeah, you don't fit our mandate.
They just
Whereas
don't
for
get it.
them, those
Yeah.
things just to not fit made us a good fit for this investor. So once that alignment happens, it's like, kind of the it's the love at first sight. It's like, you get me, you
Yes.
understand
Oh
what we're
my
trying to
God.
do.
This is
And
a
then they get
godsend.
excited and we're excited. Yeah.
I love that. And this is you're touching on something that is extremely painful for founders. They're looking for investors left and right, and they kind of almost spam the investor population out there to see if they're a fit. But when you talk to the investors that get the industry, that's a whole
Mhm.
new world where you got the experience from the investors. Um, if you put it from their perspective, they already see so many things that you don't like from the
Mhm.
potential point of view because they probably build businesses around that industry, so they know how they can help. And
Mhm.
founders, they underestimate that a lot. They sometimes think that, okay, I should just get money from pretty much anyone, like they call it dumb money, and just
Yeah.
get the dumb money in and start building. But then these type of investors, like the one that you're referring to, they can just unlock so much more than just the casual
Mhm.
general investor out there.
Yeah. The one thing too that I kind of heard, early on when I was fundraising is they say, ask for advice and you'll get money. Ask for money, and you'll get advice. And oftentimes I think if you go into kind of those conversations with that mindset of saying, go to an investor and be like, yeah, I want your money, but more than anything, I want to learn. Tell me about this, tell me about that. And so, use those first VC conversations as a springboard into the next VC conversations, especially knowing that you're going to hear so many no's. You might as well make some, create some value out of them. And so, why did you pass? Don't just, they're going to give you an answer that allows them to save face and you to save face. Don't accept that. and be very frank with them and say, no, I know there's a real reason why. Like, tell me. Like, it's okay to tell me my baby's ugly. I need to know so I can get some plastic surgery. So,
And this is
um,
important. Wow. It's so important what you're
yeah,
saying.
so
And
just going in and saying, "I wanna learn," think
mm,
about it as a process, not just a single transactional event,
yeah.
but knowing
Mm.
that you're going to hear a lot of no's, try to figure out a way to learn from each and every single one of them.
Oh my God, that is definitely golden right there. And what did you learn from that phase where you closed that beautiful C round and all the way to now the Series A, which is also huge, like $12 million. That's amazing for
Mhm.
a Series A. What were your biggest learnings that you feel like you want to share with the founders listening in?
The big thing is you're always fundraising, and so, um early on before we even needed to raise capital, as I mentioned, I was learning about just the VC ecosystem. I became an investor. I was an angel investor. I had a lot of conversations, and so that's just generally the way I approach most things: is learn, 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 and then execute hard. And so that was a very similar process. And then after the seed round, investors start to reach out because they see, oh, this company was funded. That's a signal from the market. Maybe we should have a conversation. And it's real easy, especially when you're busy, just to be like, "Not yet, no." But the investors, like, we're currently raising a Series B, kicked off just recently. We're already having multiple firms fly out want to meet with us. They're pitching
Nice.
us on why they should, be able to invest.
Seriously.
And so in many ways, the tables have turned, and that's because I've had these conversations with a lot of these firms for a couple of years now.
Hmm.
And so again, like, if you use those no's as a learning moment, and you don't, take it too personally, then you can go back to those same firms that said no before and turn it into a yes, maybe at a later stage. And so, for me, again, it was just about staying curious about the process and knowing that it's not just a one and done or even a hundred and done. That it could be, you have 5 investor conversations and someone says yes. So that's a big part of it. The other thing that I learned is it's really imperative to try to control the timeline of that fundraise as much as possible. And the reason why is there's kind of this process, if you will, like a sales, process of informing, educating, negotiating, getting a term sheet, then, navigating that. And oftentimes, once that term sheet happens, they want a decision within a few days. And so the best way to get a good valuation is to have multiple term sheets. And so you've got to try to make sure that you're kind of queuing these investors and moving them through the process within, like, a relatively similar pace so that you can hopefully get several of them to the point of a term sheet at the same time. And some of the time, it's almost like, oh, you found one that's interested. You kind of push pause, you slow down on filling the top of the funnel with new investor interest. And then you kind of follow those prospects through. Some get through, some fall through. And so the best thing to do is just load as many prospects as you can to the top of the funnel and just keep filling them up. And then over time, it's exhausting. It's
Mm.
really, really
It's a
exhausting. But
full-time
the
job.
quicker you can, it is. But the quicker you can do it, the more you can kind of concentrate that process, the better outcomes you'll be able to deliver because the best way to get a good valuation is get multiple valuations.
Wow. And do you have any interesting, stories, that happened behind closed doors that you want to share? Like things that founders would rarely even imagine that can happen while you're raising a Series A. Like what happened to you that you feel like you can share?
I think a lot of it is some of the time you go into this approach of saying, I know what we're doing, I know what we're worth, and I need to demonstrate that. And so some of the time you're using certain KPIs and metrics to say this is why we're valuable and this is how you should value us. But oftentimes at those various stages, I think it's more the market that dictates that. If you do something that's very far out and very incredibly unique, like Uber or Airbnb, those were two that you mentioned. In some ways, you can almost kind of say, no, this is the benchmark that we should be measured off of, and because there's no other, existing idea that's similar in nature, they just have to trust you on that. But that's really, really hard to do. That's the exception more so than the rule. The rule is they have certain ways of measuring you at the Series A, at the Series B, at the Series C, and so on, and they're different every time. And so it's important to understand what are they measuring and how do you show value there. So one mistake we made, well, actually, I wouldn't say it was a mistake. It was deliberate, but in hindsight, the fact that I didn't do a better job of really selling this aspect of 401 Go led to us getting, maybe not quite as much value out of that Series A as we could have. And the fact is that in VC world, especially at the Series A, it's about measuring traction. How do you do that? They do that through measuring revenue. When we launched, we weren't focused on building revenue. We were focused on building a product.
Huh.
And our competition, instead, what they did is they went and bought shitty existing software. They put a better digital interface on it. They said, "Look, it's new tech," and
Okay.
and and they spent most of their time building revenue, not a product. And
Mm.
and so they went to Series A with better, traction and a product that, in many ways, they were behind us, especially from kind of a development and a product standpoint. But because the investors were so just focused on revenue, that's all that mattered. And so that's what really kind of fueled for these firms this growth at all costs mentality, which in the end, I actually don't think has suited them well. And the reason why is because we're now coming in. And so in many ways, they were the trailblazer and they kind of pushed through, a lot of friction that we would normally have to overcome. But because they did that for us, but they don't have a really good product, they lose so much of that opportunity year after getting it. And guess what? We're there to scoop it up.
Ah,
And
yeah.
so we've been able to grow 10 to 20 times more efficiently than our competition. And the reason why is because I think we focused on the right thing. Sadly, it wasn't necessarily the thing that most investors want us focused on. And so, we didn't maybe extract as much value from the market as we could have in that Series A. We've certainly turned the tables on that. We're going to make up for it in the Series B, which we're currently
Ah,
raising. But at that Series
amazing.
A stage, had I known that they would have been benchmarking us so heavily off of revenue, I either would have focused more on revenue and less on product, or I would have focused really hard on proving to them why the product matters so much and telling them that you've got to forget, these typical revenue benchmarks and focus more on what we've accomplished from a product or a technology standpoint.
Wow. And for the founders listening in that are currently also thinking about maybe raising a Series A, can you tell us the difference of the rejection proportions, like the seed versus the Series A? There's a lot less investors doing Series A than the seed rounds. So did you go through way more rejections, or was it, less of a battle there?
It was far less of a battle, and
Uh-huh.
the reason why is because as you're getting ready to raise your Series A, you've got to raise a seed stage. So, it's that very first round, whatever you call it, that's going to be the hardest. And the reason
Mm.
why is because no one's heard of you. So many of these investors are what I call momentum investors. They're looking for other
Mm.
signals. They don't want to be the first mover, but as soon as they see another investor move that's
Aha.
maybe in kind of adjacent territory, they're like, "Oh, there's an opportunity here." And so they're all very hesitant. It's just there's these really weird dynamics. And that's as a founder, you learn what those dynamics are and you start to feed off of that and spoon feed them. And one of those is fear of missing out.
Yeah.
As soon as they see a signal from maybe another VC, they're like, oh, we've got to get in because we're going to miss out. And so, in a lot of ways, understanding those dynamics helps as you're starting to kind of build a successful round. And that's why with this round, we wanted to make sure that we got as many people into the top of the pipeline and we're running it as concentrated as we possibly can, meaning we have, a lot of interest in there because that creates that element of exclusivity, a lot more market signals. And so I think that's the big thing is just understanding that, in that first stage, you're going to get a lot of no's, but you start talking. And then as soon as somebody takes money, everyone else goes, oh, they got money. Somebody must think they're interesting. Maybe I should take a second look. And then that's where they come back in the Series A and we had some that passed on our Series A, and guess what? They're flying out to meet with us next week because they're very
Ah,
interested in leading our Series B.
boom.
So each time it gets significantly easier because suddenly the tables start to shift, and you're no longer chasing them; they're chasing you. And it's kind of around that A B stage that typically happens.
And can you put a number on it? Like, is it, 5 times less expensive time-wise to raise like a Series A, or is it 10 times less expensive time-wise, like approximately?
I'd say if anything, it probably actually gets more complex.
Hmm.
And the reason why is because you're dealing with bigger numbers, bigger firms. The legal costs can sometimes get more exasperated.
Uh-huh.
On top of that, you already have existing board members that add complexity because they want their legal review in. So when it's just you and your first investor, there's two parties. When you start to bring in more investors, you have your existing investors that have their idea, their say, they've got board seats, they have, voting control, and so you need to accommodate a lot more parties in those subsequent transactions. So, well, like your initial, like the kind of the outreach portion of trying to find people to talk to, that's significantly reduced. But kind of the deal making process, I think, is a lot stricter. At this stage, we're having to provide 10 times the amount of kind of pre-term sheet diligence information. So they want to look at models, they want to analyze success and traction. Whereas in those early stages, there is no success or traction. They're like, can Dan do this or not? And oftentimes, like I
Yeah.
know, for our first seed series investor, they had some pretty personal ties to the university that I finally graduated from. And so guess what he did? He called the dean of the school and said, "Tell me about Dan Beck."
Oh, seriously?
And
It's
so
that
it was
intense?
more about vetting me than it was necessarily the idea.
Oh,
In
wow.
later stages, it comes about vetting the idea and the traction. So they want to look at financials, they want to look at legal documents and review. So it's not necessarily that there's less or more. It's just kind of the type of information and what you're doing shifts. You know, during those different fundraise cycles.
Amazing, amazing. And what was the most brutal experience that happened during the transition that you can't forget?
Um, I think more than anything, the toll that it takes on kind of like your mental, emotional, personal life. I've started and been through a number of businesses and transactions, and I'm accustomed to that kind of stress. But the difference is here is it's in many ways at scale.
Hmm.
Prior businesses when they're bootstrapped, it's largely my money or mine or my brother's money. Yes, you do have a lot of livelihoods involved where you've got your employees and their families, and you know them, extremely well because of just that small business nature. And so you do feel the pressure of that when you're making decisions. In a startup, I'm making personal commitments to investors. And yes, you can say these are big funds, they have money to lose or whatever. But to me, in the way that I'm wired, I'm still making a commitment to another human.
Yeah.
And those are angel investors, those are friends. This is the first time that I took money from family or friends. Other times I had people offer, but this is the first time. And I
Hmm.
think the reason why is I knew kind of the mental load that was going to be associated with doing so. And so I think at the end of the day, that there's been moments where that really, really weighs on me where you see these obstacles come up and you're like, okay, there's a lot of livelihoods at stake here. I convinced
Hmm.
engineers, I convinced other team members that we have here to leave better paying, safer jobs to come work at a scrappy little startup, and I convinced them of a mission and a vision that we had. And I feel a lot of responsibility around that and making sure that we can deliver on that promise.
Yeah, it's not scrappy and little anymore. We can say that, right?
Mhm.
We're talking about next level growth at this point. From what I spotted, the press release, you're almost like at 200 employees at this point, right?
We're at about 100
Oh,
currently.
okay. Still, that's huge. That's a little village.
It is.
We're
Yes,
talking
it
about
really
like,
is.
yeah, a little village right there. Yeah. So, and okay, we got to this point. So I'm very curious. At this point, there's a huge mindset shift going on probably, as you're raising and closing the Series A. I
Mhm.
guess that there's a lot more responsibility now on the table. So this is where you start to think about delegation and trying to, offset a bunch of tasks from your plate. Uh, to
Mhm.
get more space, more headspace, like for just the focus on growing the next phase of the business. Maybe you can share a little bit about that. I think you mentioned that there was quite some challenges there.
Yeah, so, like, the first time, we're in the middle of a Series B fundraise right now, and in many ways, I kind of am comparing and contrasting that to the Series A, in terms of, like, what's being asked of us, the questions, the type of investors that we're talking to, but a big part of it too is my personal workload involved in that. So in the Series A, I didn't have a head of finance yet. We had, like, a fractional CFO that's not very hands-on, and then I didn't have a chief of staff. I didn't have nearly the executive suite that I do now. And so I was doing all of that myself.
Oh my God.
When we get off the call and they said, "Hey, can we see this bottle?" or "What about this?" or whatever, I was in Excel. I
Oof,
was on the phone pitching. I was taking phone calls.
that's
So I
intense.
was doing a lot of work. Whereas now it's nice because I've got a chief of staff and a head of finance who are on me, are with me on every single call. They're there along the process. They're managing the data room. They're opening up access, keeping track of things, handling requests, and so it's allowed us to kind of run that very aggressive, concentrated approach. Whereas before, that was all on me. And
Mm.
so when it comes to the types of things that they're doing, that was really easy for me to relinquish because one, like I understand finance. I've had to build businesses. I've had to manage that before, but not nearly as well as somebody, and that's been their entire job and career.
Yeah.
And so I gladly handed off that responsibility. My chief of staff is incredibly. He's got his CFA, so he thinks about things from very much an analytical lens. And so I knew he was going to be ideal in helping us move through that process and helping potential investors, analyze and consider whether we'd be a good investment. And so it's just natural for me to hand that off. But there's other elements of the business. Some of the time, founders are really good at sales, and they have a hard time relinquishing that to a chief revenue officer. Or for me, I love marketing, and
Mm.
I'm sure I annoy the heck out of my marketing leaders because I want to sometimes be involved with decisions. They're like, "Well, we just have to appease Dan because he wants to be involved in this because he thinks he's a marketer." And so there are elements that are a little bit harder to give up
Mm.
because some of the time you can look back and be like, "Oh, I think I can do that better." And so I've had to learn that better isn't really a thing. It's just for me, I maybe have a different way of doing it, but it's not necessarily better. And so that it is kind of hard to give up some of these things and in a way shift the elements of work that give you joy. And so for me, I've really learned a lot about what do I like to do, what do I not like to do, because as an entrepreneur, and many times you get stuck doing everything.
Yeah.
And so you sometimes go, I can do it all. I'm good at a lot of different things. But really, at the end of the day, there's the things that give you energy as you're doing them, and there's the things that rob energy as you're doing them. And for me, talking about the company, talking about vision, being curious, wonder and invention, those are the two, kind of working geniuses that I have that give me energy. But there's other things that just drain me. And so by being able to focus on those things that give me energy, I'm at my best every minute of every day, and I can, really kind of hire and build a team around those other things that rob energy from me.
Dan, this is extremely inspiring because when we're talking about funding rounds, just founding a company, within 2 years, 90% of businesses, they just close without any funding.
Mhm.
So going through having your family to trust you and then raising
Mhm.
potentially funds from angel investors and then maybe going through a seed round, that's already like a survival stage that's 95% of businesses don't get to. Now, if we
What do you
zoom
mean?
in on the 5% that survived, those that go from series seed all the way to series A, meh, that's 1 out of 10. And then from A to B, that's probably like 1 out of 5, if, even maybe less. So you're on the other side of the storm of the storm. How do you feel
Yes.
about, being in the middle of this crazy storm in your life where you're just going next level, not looking back,
Mhm.
just evolving like crazy every day, probably. What do you have to
Yeah.
report to those founders that are still in the fog trying to survive?
It's a mindset, and I think that's the key is really understanding that there's gotta be kind of that survivor mindset. You and whether it's hubris or pride or an overactive ego, I don't know. But at the end of the day, it's about just going, "You know what? This is gonna be successful." Maybe not success in the way that I define it, but this is going to be successful. And we certainly have ambitions of being, multi-billion-dollar company, but that's not the only successful outcome. There's multiple successful outcomes. And so, again, I think it's about less about falling in love with an idea and falling more in love with the process of making an idea real. And so to me, that's just been, I've fortunately have had enough experience with prior businesses where you hit obstacle after obstacle after obstacle. And every time you get over one and it's a new one and you get over that one, you get over that one, suddenly, those data points, they don't scare you. They don't intimidate you. They don't rattle you at all. You go, okay, this is scary. I mean, there's been moments where we are, days away from not being able to make payroll
Oh, wow.
and we make something happen. Fortunately, that doesn't happen very often, and that's more of an element that was in some of the prior businesses that I had.
Hmm.
But those are terrifying moments, and if you let
Yeah.
that kind of take over your ability to think and problem solve, then they will consume you. Whereas you go, okay, this is a problem. That's okay. I can overcome it. And so I think it has a lot to do with resiliency for those other founders that gave up. You kind of cite those statistics where the vast majority of them can't make it, and they'll be like, "I didn't give up, I just couldn't make it." They, at some point, had to decide for themselves they couldn't make it. And so for me, it's like, even if the bank is saying no, even if investors are saying no, even if the market is saying no, as long as I'm determined that this idea is not done and I'm not giving up, then I'm not giving up. And so I think that's maybe part of it is just I'm way more stubborn and bullheaded than other founders. Other founders, they encounter a little bit of resistance and they're like, ah, that's it. That's the signal. I need to quit. And they're like, I didn't make it. No, you decided to not make it. And that's the decision. Is for me, I've just never decided that I'm not going to make it. I've never had like a business failure. I've had some that didn't work out. We had a food truck, my brother and I, after a couple of years, didn't make any money. We're like, hey, that was a dumb idea. We learned from it. But, we didn't file bankruptcy. Nobody was hurt in the process of doing that.
Oh, nice.
And so I think that's the big difference is I've got the mindset of like, this is going to work. And as long as you believe that, then you're going to keep pushing forward. And so I think that's the bigger difference is it's going to take a lot more to slow me down or to get me to stop than maybe other ones that kind of, raise the white flag a lot sooner.
I love that. And if you look back, like, 4 years ago, what's like the biggest pattern of the mindset shift that you're observing that you think that founders should adopt?
It's that resiliency, one. The other thing too that is very different between what I'm doing now and what I've done in the past is there's a lot more of kind of a people element to this business. Before I was very kind of cold and analytical, and it was about data and numbers and operations and processes and efficiency. When you get into kind of the people side of things, there's a lot more soft skills that for me were somewhat underdeveloped, and so as I've kind of focused on that in many ways, that's part of that curious growth mindset. Is for me, it's about building out a better organization that's centered around people, and so I've kind of seen that evolution over time where we want to deliver the best service we possibly can. How do you do that? You have people that love their job. How do you do that? You create this incredible work environment. How do you do that? You have good ideas that inspire people, and you take good care of them. And so, I think that's probably one of the biggest shifts here is I moved away from kind of a business where it's about automation, it's about scale, it's about efficiency and numbers and data and process and, very kind of meaty when it comes to like those operational things that I love to a business that's much more kind of service oriented. Yes, we're a tech company, but there still is a service element to it, and that service element shows up when people really need help. I mean, these are their retirements. There's the stakes are very high, and so I think that's probably one of the biggest shifts for me is just how do you become more of a people person than somebody that's just kind of process driven and cold and analytical and loves to solve problems.
And do you feel like at this point the Series B process is taking a toll, like on the life work type of balance, time with the wife, the kids, the friends, having a little bit of time for yourself, maybe watch a little Netflix episode or something. Does that happen?
It does, but part of that too is also the understanding of everything in life coming in phases, and so, towards the end of last year, I went through a divorce. At that
Oh,
moment,
okay. Sorry to
um,
hear about that.
my
Yeah.
my personal life became the priority. My kids became the priority. Work was kind of on the back burner in many ways, and this is why having a really good supportive executive team was so necessary in building an environment where I could go through a challenge as massive as that and come out on the other side, hopefully better than some of the challenges that led up to that. That's what this environment created for me. And so, leading up to it, I knew this summer one, it was special because this is a chance for me to kind of form new traditions with my kids. I've got, 50-50 custody with
Oh,
with their mother. And so, I'm trying to do everything I can because really at the end of the day, the role I'm most proud about is that as a father. And so
that's
knowing
beautiful.
that I had a fundraise coming up, I wanted to make sure that I spent a lot of really good quality time with the kids. And so, I don't really believe in kind of this concept of work-life balance where it's like 9 to 5 and then it's shut off. For me, it kind of ebbs and flows.
Mm.
And so the first part of the summer, it was about my kids. Like I had, 2 or 3 solid weeks where I was with just my kids. And yes, there were some work things, but that was very much the priority. And then also I let my loved ones and friends know this is what's going on. And they can lean in and help me. They can help with my kids. They can help with other things to kind of, help alleviate that burden. And so, yeah, it is exhausting. It can be,
Yeah.
yesterday I had back-to-back calls with like no breaks. And, our office administrator was really kind. She went out and brought me lunch. And,
Oh,
so, we built a very supportive environment where we all help each other. And there's times that it becomes a very emotionally and mentally demanding, but knowing that allows me to kind of prepare for it. So it's like a marathon. That's a real big accomplishment for anybody. You don't go into a marathon unless you're prepared for it. And so that's kind of what I've been doing is preparing for this, preparing the team, preparing myself, preparing my family, my kids, loved ones, knowing that I'm going to be running a marathon for the next couple months, and then it's going to shift into something else.
Absolutely. You just nailed it. You said it exactly. You called it out for what it is. Business is, in my opinion, like life's great sport. Like literally,
Yes.
you can cycle, okay, great. And I cycle like maybe 20, 25 kilometers every day, but it's not the same as business. Like business, you have to just do this every day for the rest of your life or until you decide to, to quit. And speaking of sports, like, do you have time to work out, to take care of your health? Because the reason I'm asking is because without, a health foundation, well, the rest
Yeah.
kind of doesn't make sense, right? Like, how do you view that?
For me, it's super critical. Everyone knows that I rarely take a meeting before 9 a.m. And the reason why is because I've got to go and I've got to spend some time in the gym. That's kind of my time to focus on my mental health, to take care of my body, to make sure that I'm in, peak condition for myself, for my family, for my coworkers. And it is a big part. For a while I was doing triathlons. This spring I did a half Ironman. And unfortunately, there was a lot going on in my life, and I didn't really prepare very much for that race. But because I have just, I think, an already higher baseline than many people, I was still able to do the race just fine with very little preparation. And so for me, yeah, the mental health part of it, I have a therapist that I go to, at least once a month, some of the time more frequently than that. And so, and the reason I do that is because I'm trying to be deliberate. Like I go and work out to keep from getting sick. I don't wait till I'm sick and go, okay, I better take care of myself. I take care of myself to try to be in peak shape mentally, physically. And that's a big part of it. There is a physical toll. Like when I was going through my divorce, despite everything I was doing to take care of my body, my nervous system was a wreck. I
Oh,
lost 30 pounds. And
whoa.
so, having been at least trying to take care of myself, it could have been far worse and far more detrimental. And so stress does take a physical toll. It's so important to be thinking about, how, our physical strength and well-being as well as our mental health and well-being. Because I love how you talk about it being like the great, life sport. It really is. And if you're not trained for it, it'll eat you up and spit you out.
Yeah, and it will spit you out in little like a mush or something. Nothing's gonna be
Yes,
left. And
exactly.
this is so taboo. Like it's one of these things that founders never dare to talk about. Like when they get to stages like Series A or Series B, which is extremely rare, we don't
Mhm.
have the chance to ask them how do these founders take care of themselves? Because my
Yeah.
God, it's so demanding, like literally, and
Mhm.
we can't even imagine how demanding it can be because there's so much responsibility. There's always these things, hitting our processes just nonstop, and we have to like disconnect at some point
Mhm.
to just get a little bit of balance. Like maybe you have some insight, like for example, what's your diet like? Like, do you eat keto, for example, or do you not really care about that? Like, how do you stay balanced from that perspective?
I've tried different diets and for me, again, it's about curiosity and experimentation. And so, there was a period, a few years back where I went to like a dietitian and I was very diligent about eating. And for me, it was learning more about, okay, how does my body respond to different things? How much protein should I be taking, macros? And so it was kind of a learning endeavor. I got down to, like super lean. I was lower than 4%
Oh
body fat.
wow!
And
Congrats.
so for
That's
me, it
so
was like,
impossible almost to get to the
it
99% is out
it
there.
was a challenge, but at the same time, like, when I finally got there, I was like, "I don't feel so great." Like, this
Okay.
isn't I don't wanna be like a bodybuilder, and so but at least exploring kind of what are the limits of that envelope, if you will, it helped me better understand myself, my body, what I can do. Like, I don't have a lot of food sensitivities, I know some people do, and so I'm very fortunate that I can fuel myself in a lot of different ways, and at the same time, as I've gotten older, I've realized things like sugar spike, my glucose levels more, and I can get headaches where I didn't before.
Yep.
And so I think part of that too is just knowing that my body's aging. That's not a bad thing. It is what it is, and I need to take care of it differently. I need to think about things differently. And so whether that's sugar, alcohol consumption, sleep, anything of that nature, it's just being aware. It's listening to my body, and trying to respond accordingly, knowing that sometimes I used to be kind of this mindset of like, I've got to work out every day. So even if I only get 2 hours of sleep, I'm still going to go get up and go work out. That shifted a little bit. Now I realize that sleep's probably more of a priority because I need mental sharpness as well. And so there's times where I may have a poor night of sleep and I wake up and I'm like, you know what, today's a day where I'm getting an extra hour or two of sleep rather than go spend time at the gym.
That's so important. I also do that, by the way. Like it feels like power naps
Mhm.
sometimes are super helpful. Like we're not 18
Yes.
anymore, but a small little, even 25 minutes can boost the system in a way that caffeine will never work.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's amazing. And just curious, before we leave this topic on the side, when you said you got to 4%, can you share like a few tips on how you got there as a founder with such a busy schedule?
For me, it was about like I learned what foods I should be eating, and rather than try to get creative within that, I just ate the same thing every day.
Okay.
So I knew I needed a lot of protein, and I joked because I'd get like a packet of like, turkey from like the lunch meats from like Costco, and I'd have to put like half of the entire package on my sandwich. And so after like 3 months, I'm just eating a turkey sandwich for lunch every day, a
Wow.
cheese stick and some like, wheat thins as snacks, protein drinks and everything else. Like in a way, I mean, you've heard of founders that just wear the same thing, like a gray
Yes.
turtleneck and some jeans or whatever. The reason they do that is because then they don't have to worry about
Exactly.
choice. It's a lot easier just to kind of, you know, uh, check that box. And so for me, it wasn't about how I enjoy food. It was more I thought of food as fuel. And this was food that I knew or fuel that I knew was best for what I was trying to accomplish at the time. And I had no problems eating that. It wasn't hard for me to not pick up a candy bar. It was just like, I'm not doing that now. I'm focused on this. This is easy. And so it was, a ton of protein. That was the one thing I learned is I need way more protein than I was giving myself before. And I saw that once I was really hitting those protein macros, it made it a lot easier. I felt fuller. I was able to kind of, build more muscle, stay leaner. And so it wasn't like any super secret recipe. If anything, I feel like I have buddies that have done keto, and
Ooh,
some of the time, the more challenging diets I think are the ones that are harder to adhere to because they can be so restrictive. And the minute you deviate from that, it kind of wrecks your system because your system's gone. It's not had carbs for so long, and then all of a sudden you give it a bunch of carbs, and it's like what's happening, and you get sick from it.
exactly.
For me, I didn't want anything that extreme, so it was more about moderative changes that led to these bigger outcomes. Where instead of it wasn't there was one thing that was a 50 or 70% change. It was dozens of 1 to 2% changes that kind of delivered that outcome because that's a lot easier because if you lose some here or there, there's just these small incremental changes where if there's one thing that is 60 to 70% of your success, you better hit that every time. Otherwise, if there's any slight deviation from that, it could lead to failure. So that's kind of the way I think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess you adhere like to the 2 grams per kilogram of body weight for building muscles and
Mhm.
losing fat like at the same time. Like this
Yep.
literally worked. And I think founders that are on a journey, if they get consumed by stress too much, like they should really watch their diets and also they should really like take care of their bodies at the gym or just walking every day, just
Yep.
biking. It just solves so many problems because you also have some time for yourself where you're processing what happened, today. What's the next step? What should I do as my next move? Like I talked to this investor, I'm building that feature, and you have all this time to yourself to like focus while doing that.
For me, one thing that was really helpful, and I know this sounds like super silly or maybe overused, but yoga. For me, I'm kind of like that bullheaded, like I want to push heavyweight and swing things around and be the fastest and hit the treadmill hard. And, so you're very performance driven. You see yoga for me, it was a little too woo. But when I did that, I learned how to breathe. And when I learned
Mm.
how to breathe, I learned how to manage stress. And, as I could start to recognize like my nervous system being dysregulated, I learned that something as simple as like kind of grounding myself through breath, bringing myself back into the present, because I think that's the other challenge a lot of entrepreneurs have and founders is I have a really hard time being present. And that's not fair to my loved ones. That's not fair to my kids when, my 6 year old says, Dad, come play with me. And I'm there playing with him, but really my mind is at work thinking about something else. I'm
Ah,
I'm I'm a week ahead worried about a meeting. And so, I needed to be very deliberate about how I can be present. And one of the ways that I've learned to do that is to connect with my breath. And it's
hmm.
and it's silly because we breathe instinctively. We have to, it's just part of the, our way we're wired. But when you are deliberately thinking about it, it really kind of draws you in and helps me be more present. And so when I was going through really stressful, moments leading up to the divorce and everything else, just some of the time sitting at my desk, I'd throw in some headphones and I'd listen to something just kind of calming and I'd focus on my breath and it would bring me back to,
Wow.
okay, I'm safe. And I can solve the problem that's in front of me right now. And so for me, yoga taught me that. It just taught me how to breathe, how to kind of control my body, and that was really helpful.
Dan, my imagination is telling me that 80% of founders, like while listening, they're growing through a very stable, like lifestyle, I guess. And the other 20%, they have issues. Like it could be relationship problems, it could be health problems. So this really hits those that are in that, you know, phase probably in their life where you should apply that. You should give yourself some space. You should breathe differently. You should eat differently. You should get more time with yourself if you're having, these difficult issues.
100%. One thing that I do as well that's really I live in Utah. Utah is really known for kind of all the access to outdoors, and so in the summer I love to mountain bike. I try to get out at least once a week, and really what that does is it forces me to be present because I can't be thinking about a board meeting in a couple weeks as I'm going 40 miles an hour down some narrow trail with trees on either side of me and a cliff face there. Like I've got to be in the moment, thinking don't die, don't die, don't die. And so it puts me in that forces me into that flow state, which is really therapeutic because at that moment, I always joke with like, kind of friends. It's like if you need to have a stressful conversation with me or something you think that might activate me, do it after mountain biking because at that point, like I'm Teflon, nothing's gonna stick. I'm gonna be just super easygoing. And so everyone's got their version of that. For me, mountain biking, yoga, gym in the morning, those are things that I deliberately need to make sure I make time for because they help me be ready. It's what, Franklin Covey talks about stopping to sharpen the saw. Some of the time we're like, I'm late, I'm slow, I need to get this done. And we don't take the time to stop and sharpen the saw and we just wear ourselves out. And so even though it may seem counterproductive, it may seem like I don't have enough time to do these things. If you don't take the time, the saw gets dull. It wears you out. It wears out those around you.
By the way, I'm guilty. I also do the same thing. I mountain bike. Like literally, I love putting my life in danger on a bike. This is
Yes.
something so addictive, like you can't describe it.
Oh, it is so fun. Yeah, and it's only more, I'd say like the recent 5 or 6 years that I started doing that, and I wish I would've started sooner.
Oh my
So,
god, yeah.
find something, whether it's running, cycling, mountain biking, whatever it may be, it can be very restorative.
Absolutely. And, just as we're still in this subject, like lately, what I love doing, it's like hanging myself like by the legs on an outside gym and just doing reverse
Oh, yeah.
crunches. Like literally, I started with like two reverse crunches, and at this point, I'm at 35. Like after
Oh,
like
wow.
yeah, 6 months. So when you
That's
do that,
awesome.
you build up your core, and then when you're mountain biking, you have so much more energy. It's really cool. So yeah, definitely an amazing subject right there. But I want to get back because we don't have a lot of time left. I want to get back to the upside. So on the upside, with the Series B, my guess is that it's so much different. You got delegation going on because you need to fundraise. But while you're raising, like, is there anything insightful that you want to like share with the viewers that you spotted?
It's about proving that you can generate scale.
Hmm.
In the C stage, it's proving that you have a good idea. In the A stage, it's proving that you can generate traction. In the B stage, it's that you can accelerate that traction and that growth. And so all the questions, a lot of the due diligence goes into, is this business growing like this or is this business growing like this? They want to
Yeah.
see the early part of that hockey stick
Hmm.
to show that yes, we're at this inflection point where we can accelerate our growth rate. And so they're looking for those signals. So it's imperative to know what they're looking for because if you do, the year, the months leading up to it, you can focus on making sure that those are the metrics that internally you're focused on. And so for us, there's an element of building out, at this stage, we're very, we're not a very deep organization. There's kind of like the executive team, and then
Hmm.
there's, in very many ways, the front line, and we're all very tight, and there's not a lot of middle structure. We're now in the process of kind of adding some of that middle structure, that process. In those early
Hmm.
stages, you welcome experimentation, you encourage experimentation. It's about, lots of pivots. But then the further along you get, the more disciplined you have to become in every way. And so it's, your financials have to be far more disciplined. That's where, you typically are having you bringing in a CFO and accounting functions. Just everything has to kind of reach a level of rigor that is similar to what you see in public companies where there's better reporting structures, there's middle management. And so that's a lot of what we're building out is either you're building that out or you're showing that you have um, the right processes in place to be building that out with the Series B funds. And so that's kind of the focus right now is just proving that we can take what we've been doing and accelerate that. And we've been growing, tremendously well. So, this year to date, we've averaged 190% year over year growth
Amazing.
every month. And so,
Wow.
and we're telling investors that we can accelerate that. They're going to say, well, how? Prove it. And a lot of putting into like the data room and the conversations we're having are showing them this is how we've been able to accelerate over the last year, and this is why it will continue to accelerate.
Wow. That's amazing. 190% growth. That's month over month?
Sorry, no, that's year over
Year
year.
over year. Okay, still, it's
Yeah.
still huge. We're talking about almost
Mhm.
2x growth year over year.
Yes.
That's huge. Most
Mhm.
startup founders would just dream of having that type of curve. Whoa. And
Exactly.
did you have any like big pivots between Series A and Series B that you spotted that you're going through, or not really?
Not really.
Mm.
For us, it's been more of kind of this accretive process of, we build out something that works really well. And then we realize that that can continue to grow on its own. And then we figure out, oh, we can add in this layer here. And so for us, the thing that we've layered on, especially this last year, is we still have kind of our core, growth engine, which is still growing at a very substantial rate. But then also we're focusing more on kind of these like embedded relationships or enterprise relationships where we're leveraging outside sales forces. We come in as like a product partner, not just a referral partner. And because of that, it's allowing us to basically use outside resources, essentially other sales forces to help grow and sell our product. And so that's really been the focus this year is how do we build more of those enterprise, like bigger, types of relationships and that's been entirely the focus, and that's the thing that all these new investors are most excited about.
And do you feel like you had to unlearn something huge in your life to get to where you are right now?
This time, no, and I say this time, no, because in so many prior businesses, I had to.
Mm,
I mean,
interesting.
I'm sure there's just nothing that stands out as like, oh, there's a huge fundamental shift. I think with this one, it was just much more deliberate. We didn't rush into it, in the same way. I think other businesses, because they were internally funded, we would sometimes rush into something in just a matter of weeks. With this one, we were very deliberate in kind of figuring out what's the best way we do this. How do we, so in many ways, like the idea that we had for this business on day one is very much the same idea that we have today. And I think that's because we were just very slow and deliberate going into it. Whereas some of the time, if you rush into it, that's the need for pivots. And I don't think there's necessarily one right way or another. It's just some requires flexibility at different stages. We had to be very flexible in those early ideation stages, and because we don't have to be as flexible as we're kind of taking this to market and in that operational or execution phase.
And can you share also like what type of fires do you put out every day, like on a daily basis at this point of the phase of your journey, like compared to when you're still in C stage? Like I guess when you enter the office,
Mhm,
you get hundreds of people walking around. Like there are probably crazy situations going on. Like anything you'd
mhm.
you'd want to share there?
Probably the biggest thing are just the people aspects of the
Mm,
business, because to me, it doesn't matter, who or what part in the organization. When we have to, maybe terminate a relationship, and then oftentimes that's for the benefit of both us as well as that individual. The longer they're in a position where they're not going to excel, it's a detriment to them and their future career. And so, those matters are the ones that are most consuming for me. And the reason why is because I know these are people's livelihoods. There's a lot at stake here, and so it's hard when you're kind of coming together and you're both excited to have kind of like that, those kind of moments. So any of the issues that are kind of related to people within the organization or partners, kind of that human element. For me, that's the hardest to deal with, and I think the reason why is because maybe in other businesses I was maybe more cold and analytical, and it was about process and operations and procedures and just delivering a level of excellence within operations. And here we're focusing a lot more on the people element. And that's just a little harder to deal with, at least for me, because the way that, I'm wired. And so, I think that's probably the
Yeah.
challenge most when I come into the work is give me some big messy spreadsheet, something where, process is broken or whatever. I can sink my teeth into that. But the ones that really take their toll are those human elements and those fires that involve people that we have to deal with.
Wow, Dan, thank you so much for taking us, behind the forbidden walls of the Series A experience. And I guess as we're coming in fresh off landing, I have just, I guess, two more questions left. Like, number one is, what is the most important thing that you think that we should have discussed that we didn't touch up on yet?
I'd say know when to let go. I talk a lot about resiliency and kind of pushing beyond perceived failure. You're a fitness person, and there's a lot of times where you're running, and you kind of hit the wall, and you're like, I want to quit. And at that point, you probably only exerted 60% of what you're capable of. And so when you push through, that's the mental resiliency that I think is oftentimes required in entrepreneurship. But there is also a moment when you've gotta know when to let go, when you
Hmm.
need to let go of another founder, when you need to let go of an idea and go another path. And some of the time, that's where we've gotta be really in tune with ourselves and with, kind of our support network, our loved ones, and the people around us. Because the last thing you wanna do is destroy, those kinds of relationships or whatever. So there's a real cost to this.
Oh, yeah.
And the more resilient you are, the more you push beyond failure, the higher the risk of that cost becoming more than maybe you can bear becomes. And so there is also an element, and that's kind of the counter or the yin to the yang is, yeah, I've talked a lot about pushing beyond like those perceived failure points. The one thing is know when to let go, and have a system in place and to do so. Have people that, can say, hey, I think it might be time for you to ring the bell. Let's like have a real conversation about this. And so it's knowing who in your life can be the ones to be your backstop, to maybe help at what point you should
Yeah.
let go.
Wow, that's really important. And a lot of people, they just don't get it. Like, a lot of founders, they think that you always need to, stay with the same people, even if they're burning up the business. You can't. You
Mhm.
can't do that because the business, it's like a little microbe that transforms into, a huge animal eventually, and it becomes a predator. And people don't get that. Like, you're growing something huge, maybe something that will absolutely change the world. So you're responsible for that. And if you don't make these choices, this can cost you a lot down the future, down the line. And what are you doing right now, like that you feel like is a bit crazy, but you know that will absolutely pay off?
I think for a lot of people, that's kind of, for me internally, nothing. um, but I'm sure to, people that are outside looking in, just what I'm doing every day, being in a startup time and time again, I hear all that scary, that's risky. How do you do that? Like even my parents, for the longest time, I know in some of my early entrepreneurial endeavors, they were like, Why don't you, you'd be a really great engineer. Why don't you just go get a job as an
Oh,
engineer?"
yeah.
And so, I think for just the career that I've picked is it's just natural that people are going to see what I do is crazy. But to me, it's not.
Mm.
To me, there is a process, there is a method to the madness. So I can't really, right now, I can't identify anything. It's I've got a lot going on. It's a lot of people that may see overwhelming. Especially because I have this business and I have a few outside businesses
Oh,
that I'm
God.
involved in as well.
That's crazy
Uh,
stuff, right?
so it's just about knowing how to prioritize. I think that's really the thing is, outside looking in, it could be overwhelming, but for me, I've kind of learned how to operate in this manner.
Wow, I love that. That's the true spirit of an entrepreneur talking right there. And if you could whisper one thing to yourself at day one of starting your business, like what would you say to yourself?
Um, Founder health is really the company health. Some of the time, especially early on when I didn't understand that as well, I would feel very guilty if I needed to kind of leave the office early, if I wasn't putting insane hours, if I didn't feel like I was really kind of laying myself on the line. I may have, not, I may have felt guilty. And I've since realized, and actually it's been my board that's kind of helped me with this as I've
Wow.
gone through some kind of difficult things in my personal life where they're like, stop, how are you doing? Like we've
Hmm.
been asking about the company, but how are you doing? And I think the reason why is they know that there is a real human toll to all of this.
Yes.
And so if we're not taking care of ourselves, then their investment in the company is at greater risk. And so knowing that, founder health equals company health, for me is something that I wish I would have embraced a little bit earlier on.
And I also want to ask you, how are you doing then? How do you feel?
I feel great. I really do. This is the thing I love about this stage that I'm at right now with the company and fundraising is, in growing up, I remember in elementary school, most years you had show and tell every Friday. And it was a chance to bring something from home. You'd put it in your backpack. It was like a prize stuffed teddy bear from when you were 2 or something like that you carried around with you. And you get to pull it out and show it to the class and tell them why it's the coolest thing in the world and why you're so proud of it. And that's what I get to do over and over and over again right now on a day-to-day basis. And so I love talking about the people that I work with and the cool things that we're doing and how amazing this company is that all these incredible people have built.
Yeah.
Like I get that. Like that's a very privileged position to be in. So in my career, it doesn't get any better than this. In my personal life, yeah, there's some
Mm.
things that are, challenging that are going on. But in many ways, I'm on the other side of it. I've gone through a lot of the pain and the heartache. I'm rebuilding. I'm starting new
Hmm.
chapters. So there's nothing but opportunity ahead of me, and it's all exciting. I know there's a lot of work. I know it's going to be challenging. I know it's going to be exhausting, but the opportunities are boundless at this point.
Then that's the mindset that all founders should just inherently follow. Absolutely. Very, very happy to see you succeed. Super happy to see you
Thank you, Mark.
grow. Yeah, absolutely. And what a perfect way of ending, this episode. Then, it has been a pleasure to have you on the pod. Thanks so much for joining us for this one.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. This has been fun.
Absolutely. And for everyone watching, I really appreciate that. If you like this episode, feel free to hit that like button. Of course, subscribe if you want to receive notifications about more episodes such as these. All right. See ya in the next one. Cheers.